Hi everyone. In today's video, I'm going to do a bit of a wrap-up of my fall trip to the desert Southwest in 2019. And before I do that though, I really have to say welcome to all the new subscribers who've joined in the last couple of weeks. A lot of new folks have come over because Greg Snell gave me a very nice shout out on his channel, and so I'm very grateful for that and for all the newcomers here. If you don't know Greg Snell, I'm going to link to him up here. He is a wonderful travel videographer and photographer. He lives nomadically, travels all over the world, producing amazing content, and he was kind enough to give me a very nice shout out on his channel, and so I'm very grateful for that, and so welcome to everyone who's come over because of that. So the way I want to do this sort of wrap up of my fall trip is to look at a few of the images that are some of my favorites from the trip and maybe tell some of the sort of behind the scenes stories of how they were made and what was going on at the time that I made them. And then also I want to show in Photoshop how I worked on them. Show you my layers, adjustments, and just how I process them. And so hopefully the combination of those things will be interesting and you get a little bit of sense of sort of what was happening. So with that, let's jump in to the first image. Now, before I open or start talking about this first image, I want to mention how I open it in Photoshop and the kind of power that comes from doing the camera raw opening of these digital files. Now, you might be thinking, if you're a digital shooter, that one thing against film would be that you don't have that power of the raw file that you get coming out of a digital camera. But the truth is, once you have a scan of your film, you can open it in Photoshop through Adobe Camera Raw, and you get all the same controls over that image that you get in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw when you open it a digital file that way, a digital camera file. So that's really, really powerful and very exciting to be able to do that with a film scan. So let me just quickly show you how that works. So in Photoshop, you just do File, Open, select your this TIFF here, that's my scan from my scanner. By the way, these are all done on my Epson V700 scanner, and so that's what we'll be looking at today. Normally I also send these films off for a very nice drum scan if I'm going to make, serious prints or big enlargements, but for the purposes of these videos, I scan them myself at home on the V700, which does a very nice job. So anyway, you say File, Open, and then in the options, this is the real trick, you have to, in the format, you have to choose Camera Raw. It might come up on Photoshop or JPEG or something else by default in your system, but you choose Camera Raw, and when you say Open, then you get this panel right here, and you can see that this is Adobe Camera Raw, and it's got all the same controls over here that you're used to with Lightroom, or if you open a digital camera file in Adobe Camera Raw. It's really wonderful. And so in this case, you can see what I've done here. I have all these adjustment sliders that have been used, and if you click this button here, it zeroes those out, and this is really the raw scan. So this is what looks like coming out of my scanner, and it kind of looks, flat and sort of low contrast, which is kind of what you want with a film scan, and then you start to work on it. So if I click this button and turn those adjustments back on, then you can see how much closer to sort of finished this image looks. And so, here I've reduced exposure a little bit, brought down the highlights, took the shadows up all the way, brought the whites down a little bit, the blacks down a little bit, which helps cement those darker tones, and then a fair amount of clarity, a good amount of dehaze, which is wonderful, and then just a little bit of saturation here. So all of those things together really make this image start to sing. And so at that point then, you just say Open Image. Now, that will then open it in Photoshop, which is the image that you were looking at a second ago before I brought up the raw converter here. But one thing I want to notice is, look in the lower right, as I hover over this, you probably can't read it, but it says it says Shift click to open as a smart object. And this is the real trick. If you want to preserve the the adjustments here and the ability to go back later and change and come back to your raw, essentially your raw file, and make edits here, that's how you want to open this image. And it creates a smart object and then as a layer in Photoshop, and then you can always go back and access that layer access that layer and then you know, make any tweaks to this adjustments. However, the only thing about that is it really makes a huge file. And so right now I typically don't do that. I just do as much as I can in here and then just open it. And so it incorporates those changes, but it doesn't let me go back to them like you can in Photoshop or another editor with your raw file. So that's sort of the one downside with film here. But if you're willing to live with the really large file that you get by having a smart object, then you can absolutely have that non-destructive editing going back to these adjustments and change them at any point along the way. Okay, so that's the raw converter, and I wanted to show you that once. I'm not going to show you that on every one of these images, but I wanted to show that to you once so you could have access to that. So anyway, here's that same file now opened in Photoshop. If I turn off all my layers, you can sort of see what I've done here. This is, again, this base layer is now what came over from the raw converter. And then I've just done, you know, some things here, a color balance layer, which just sort of darkens it and builds in a little more contrast. I have a color balance here that I thought just looked a little too greeny yellowy here, and so I have a color balance layer that took care of that. I have a hue and saturation layer that then takes the blues out of those logs, because I thought that those logs just went too blue. You know, they don't look that way to your eye. Of course, the film sees that because of the open blue sky, but I wanted to look more realistic. And then I have another curves adjustment layer here, just bringing down some highlight areas. And then something I always do, which is a vignette layer. And then I have a soft light dodge and burn layer here, and I've just lightened up a couple areas and darkened a couple areas. And then cloning, just went through and just got rid of a few little distractions, typically around the edges. And so that's it. That's the final image here. So I was very excited about this one at the time I found it. This is one of those ones from my videos that I'd walked right by this area a week before, didn't even see the image, and then when I was able to come back to Zion, I was able to just stumble on this and found this. So I really, really like this image. Well, here's the thing though. After I've been looking at it for a while, it started to look funny to me, and I started wondering what it might look like if I rotated it. So this is the way it was shot, vertical orientation, but if I do image, rotate, counterclockwise, look at that. Now this really is something. I have a hunch that this is going to be the way that I'm going to end up living with this image. I think it looks a lot better. Just having that weight at the bottom of that log seems just to cement this thing, and it just feels better. And by the way, someone who was watching that video where I showed this image for the first time wrote in and gave that same exact comment. And I'd had this thought already myself, that this is probably what I wanted to do, even though I didn't do it in that video where I first showed this image. So thanks to that commenter, and I think this is probably the way we're going to go with this image. Okay, so with that, let's move on to the next image. Okay, so this is a picture from the Zion main canyon, and it's in a nice little maple grove that I discovered, and I photographed this a couple different times over the couple days that I was in Zion. And I really like this image because I like the split rock, I think is interesting in the foreground, and I like the path that sort of leads through. I mean, this is the path that you walk to get through this little maple grove up onto a higher level of the bench where this is located. So I kind of like this, this little S-curve path. It's kind of subdued, but it's there. And I photographed this a couple different times in different lighting conditions. Some were more saturated than others. This area gets beautiful reflected light in the morning, and so I think it's really neat. But this particular one, I like the less saturated version. One of the previous videos you saw where I did a comparison on the light table, I showed the transparencies of both of these, and we kind of have a sort of a 50-50 consensus on the people who've written in the comments. Some like this one more sort of natural looking, and others really like that more saturated look. So and so others say, well, split the difference, go somewhere in between. So, I might at some point take the more saturated version and desaturate a little bit and see what that looks like. But for now, anyway, we're gonna go with this one. And let me just quickly show you what I've done here. So I have several curves layers that are just lightening and darkening various areas. So here's one where I'm darkening the grasses in the center and the bottom just to sort of bring those down a little bit. And then this next one actually lightens up the tree on the right, which I just felt was going too dark. And here's a hue and saturation layer that's just reducing the magenta a little bit on the right side, moving up into the center. I just thought those trees looked a little magenta, so this is just reducing that. And then another color balance layer, which is just sort of warming up the whole scene in the center there to kind of match what the pink leaves are doing up here. And then my usual vignette around the edges just to center your eye into the middle, and then some cloning to get rid of some distractions around the edges. If you look like at the top, while I turn this on and off, you can see I'm just getting rid of just some bright leaves that are just too distracting right around the edges. And then I have again a dodge and burn soft light layer that is lightening up this path here in the foreground, just to kind of invite you in to that area some more. So that is what I did with this image. And let's take a look at the next one. So this is one of my favorite images from the trip. It's actually the last one that I took, and I really, really like the way these red leaves are all just blown in here and nestled into the nooks and crannies of this old stump. And so I think this one's pretty special. And so let's turn off all the layers here and kind of start and then build up on this. This is one where I was walking in a wash. This is again from the washes on the Upper East Side of Zion. And I was just carrying my digital camera, stumbled upon this, made some exposures, knew it was really special. And so I went back and hurried back to the car and got my large format camera because I knew I really wanted this on film. So let's take a look at what I've done here. So this one, the curves layer lightened it up just a little bit. And then this next one, you can see I have another curves layer that has is only affecting sort of the lower left-hand portion that just brings the brightness range of the whole image sort of together. And then the color balance here, I just thought it was too warm. There was a lot of sort of yellow light bouncing in. And normally we think that yellow sort of reflected light is good, but in this case, I mean, it looks really good on sandstone, but on this tree, I thought that it was just too much, and I wanted to cool it down a little bit, make it look a little more normal. So that's what that color balance layer did. And then I've darkened around the edges here on some of the bright stumps that are close to the edge that would attract your eye out that way. And then this is getting rid of some more brightness on the lower right and just the bottom. And then this hue and saturation layer is getting rid of the blue on the lower right that I just thought that a little leg of that stump went too blue. Now this next layer was something that I had to do, look in the center on the left edge, because I couldn't get that bright area to be under control. So what I did was I rescanned the transparency and brought the brightness level down during the scan, imported that, and then I'm just using this little section of that other scan and just blended it in, and so it just has tamed those highlights there on that left edge. Then some cloning. I always do just look around the edges while I'm turning this on and off, and you can see I just got rid of some distractions there. And then the usual vignette, just to darken everything around the edges and just bring your eye into the center. So again, this is a pretty special image and one of my favorites from the trip. Okay, let's look at this next image. This is from Paria Canyon. And this is an image that I think I said in the video day where we hiked this, that it almost didn't happen because I couldn't figure out how to get it in focus. And so this was a great illustration of what the view camera movements can do if you can get them set up correctly. And so here's a case where the view camera movements, it'd be easy to focus on the on nothing but the mud, just here at the foreground, all the way to the base of that canyon wall. But then all up in here at the top would be very out of focus. And so what I ended up doing, I think, if I can remember correctly, was I used the front tilt to have the near mud and the top of this wall opposite in focus. You can tip the lens forward a little bit, it shifts the plane of focus, and that gets all that in focus. Then I did a swing to get this near part of this wall and the opposite wall also in focus, which is another thing you can do. And by using a combination of the two of those together, and then you focus in between, and then you stop down. And so I was able to do all of that, and it took me a couple of tries, but I was able to do that, and that brought every bit of this into focus very comfortably. It's all really, really sharp and really nice. And otherwise you'd have to do a big focus stack, I think, if you were doing a digital camera that didn't have those movements. So anyway, let's take a look at these layers. And let's see what this one does. Okay, so this is just darkening things a little bit, particularly on the right side. And then this color balance layer is, I thought it was too warm, and so this is sort of cooling that down a little bit, more like my eyes saw. And then here's a curves adjustment layer with a mask, and you can see that's bringing down the brightness on that upper left wall. And then some typical cloning. There's some things around the edges, details I had to get rid of. Another curves layer, let's see what that one's doing. Okay, that one's just doing the very top here. This is just a really bright distracting area along the top center edge. Then an overall hue and saturation layer that just brings the overall saturation down. I just thought it was too much. And so that's what that one's doing. And then this, again, my usual vignette layer to just center your eye into the picture. And then this soft light layer, dodge and burn layer, I'm mostly darkening, I think, yes, darkening just some more distractions around the edges. So this is my favorite image from the Paria Canyon hike. So now let's look at the last image I want to talk about today. This is, again, is one of my favorites from the trip. This is back down in the Zion main canyon, and I was able to find this beautiful little grouping of trees. I really like the colors here and the arrangement of the trees, and I was able to shoot between the wind gusts to get a nice 1 second exposure. Still pretty shallow depth of field here, but I actually think that helps to separate the main subject from the background, and I really like this one. But after I got the film back, I really thought that this left-hand tree was a little too close to the left edge. And so I was, going to live with it. I think it's fine this way, but it just so happens that Ben Horne released a video where he had kind of a similar issue, where he had a tree that was too close to the left side of one of his pictures. In his case, he was sort of boxed in by some elements in the scene. In my case, I could have just shifted the camera. I mean, I just missed it and wished I'd been pointing a little more to the left. But anyway, Ben showed how you can kind of stretch and compress the image to kind of move that tree over. And when I saw that video, I thought, well, I have an image that needs that, so let's try it. So let me show you what that looks like. And here's the version where I've compressed the space in between the left two trees and then stretched the space to the left of the left tree. And now let me just sort of go back and forth and show you what that looks like. And I'll just go back and forth, and as you see it change quickly, you can sort of get a feeling for what's happening here. It's a pretty easy technique. It's not that difficult to do. Maybe a subsequent video I might tell how it works, but it's really pretty simple. But this just gives a little bit more breathing room to this image on the left-hand side. It just brings that tree in, and I think it just makes a more unified grouping there, and I think this one is more pleasing. So anyway, then let's also just take a quick look at the layers. I didn't have to do too much here. I have a curves layer that just sort of cements the darks a little bit to sort of bring that, that contrast back in. And then I have a couple of cloning layers. If you look at the top edge, there was sky coming through when I shot this, and I knew that there was. And you never want that sky coming through. It's a big distraction, but I knew I could easily clone these out. So I just have a couple layers doing that. And then my usual vignette around the edge just to cement this stuff in. So that is it for the images I want to show you from this trip. And some, actually, let me tell you one story on this one, because this might be a little bit of a cautionary tale. So I photographed this thing and was all done, and after I tore the camera down, I thought, oh, I'm going to take an iPhone picture of this, because I typically do that. It's nice to have a little picture that you can remember, you know. And with film, of course, you know, you don't get your picture until you're back from the trip and the film is processed. So so I took a picture with my iPhone, but I shot it much further to the left. And so that left-hand tree was really into the image more. Well, so for weeks and weeks and weeks, that was what I was looking at, and I was all excited about it. And then when the film came, I see that, you know, I didn't make it that way when I exposed the film. So, you know, that's totally an unforced error, my bad. And but I was glad to have that technique so I could at least correct this a little bit and try to get back to the structure of this image that I was very excited about. All right, well, that is it for the images that I wanted to show you today from the trip. And so I just want to say thanks to everyone who watched this whole series. I thought it was a really great trip to the Southwest. I was able to go so many places and just had such a great time. And so I want to thank everyone so much for watching along on all these episodes. I really, really appreciate it. And again, thank you and welcome to all the new subscribers who've come along, and hopefully you'll find what we've got planned for the rest of the year to be very interesting. So thanks again for watching. If you like this content, please subscribe and like and share. I really appreciate that, and we'll see you on the next one.